And we are about to be live on YouTube here in just a second. All right, we are live on YouTube now. Wonderful. Well, it's my wonderful pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Alan Perry to this wonderful Friday Faith series we have in store today. The Friday Faith series is something we've been kind of experimenting with in the season of Lent, since we are not able to do some of the traditional Lenten observances in person like we have in the past due to the coronavirus pandemic. For example, our bilingual stations is being done virtually online in Spanish only now rather than at the historic church. Our fish fry is takeout rather than sit down, dine in. But we figured this was an opportunity rather than doing what we had done with Soup and Scripture, that we could do a Friday Faith series instead. And so this is a continuation of that series. And today, I'm thrilled to have with us St. Francis Xavier's own Professor Dr. Alan Perry, who teaches at Gettysburg College. I'll allow you, Dr. Perry, just to introduce yourself, and we'll go right from there.
Thank you, Padre Andrew. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to share some insights, some experiences that I've had with Dante Alighieri and especially the Divine Comedy, and taking a moment really to try to understand how we can see the poem in terms of Lent. And I think it resonates very well, especially as I'll get into it, the first two parts of the comedy, the Divine Comedy. Um, and as Father said, I'm at the college. I teach a seminar every fall for the last couple of years, last 6 or 7 years, on the comedy. And it's a very moving experience for me, and I'm really happy to be able to share with you, who Dante was, what the poem speaks about in terms of renewal, and things that we can take away, generally speaking. So I'm happy to be able to share and enter into conversation.
Well, we're definitely very blessed to have you. I know a lot of students at Gettysburg College who speak really, really well of your course through Newman Association and Catholic Campus Ministry.
That's because I pay them.
You pay them?
I
Oh,
pay them
man.
to say good things about me.
I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who pays people to say nice things about me.
It's
And,
a little secret that we have.
it works really well. It's really effective. No, so I guess, Dr. Perry, I guess where we want to jump right into is maybe talk about who Dante is,
Sure.
what he wrote, um, and kind of the nuts and bolts of that, in case someone who's jumping in and hearing what we're talking about Dante doesn't think, who's this rapper or something named Dante,
Sure. Sure.
help them understand the historical context and all that. And
Yeah.
my understanding is you actually have a kind of a little visual to guide
I
us through
do. I've
that.
got a sort of a visual to help me too. I'm going to share my screen right now and get to it here. Yeah. So, as I said, really happy to be able to speak to this theme of Dante and Lent, lessons from the poet and the poem, the comedy, the Divine Comedy. And this is an image of Dante, Dante Alighieri. And if you go to Florence, in the cathedral, the Duomo, Florence, Italy, this image is presented by Domenico Michelino. It's a 15th century image. Dante actually, as I'll begin to talk about, is a little bit about his life, and then a little bit about the comedy, and then looking at this notion of how it resonates with Lent. And the main point of that really is the poem's about this journey from bondage to freedom, and from moral failure to spiritual completeness, to unity with God. Dante goes from a dark wood right outside of hell to seeing God face to face at the end of this 14,233 line wonder. So I think the resonance between the poem and Lent is this notion of journey, this notion of, we've 40 days of deep contemplating, the invitation to renew through inward looking at how we can better our lives. So a little bit about Dante. Let me go back to that's actually the slide on the poem. So Dante was born in the Tuscan city. Italy wasn't a nation at the time. In Tuscany, in this mercantile city of Florence. It had been become a banking center by the time that he was born, and would develop even further during the next couple of centuries. He was born in this bustling mercantile city. We don't know a lot about his early life, actually. He developed a very early passion for two things: poetry and statescraft. He was a politician, or he participated more fully as he became an adult in the political life of Florence. Florence was a city-state, and a very powerful city-state. So he grew up in this environment of chivalry, of being influenced. He was educated, self-taught as well, but educated in the classics. He had a deep understanding of the classics, and he engaged in a lot of frivolous banter in poetry, and that became more refined as he got older. But then he started to get really serious about his writing, and he was especially influenced by his love for a woman by the name of Beatrice Portinari, a woman whom he never married. And it's really, this woman, sort of mysterious, has been seen as his muse. But he was deeply affected by Beatrice, this sense of absolutely being knocked on his socks by her, not just for physical beauty, but this sense of how his attraction to her really spoke deeply for him, and this need to improve spiritually and morally. So he wrote about this in this work called The New Life, La Vita Nuova. And if he had never done anything else, he would be known in literary circles as the author of the spiritual autobiography. He wrote poems and then would analyze his poems about his love for this woman. Well, Beatrice moved him. He had these encounters with her at certain points in his life, and she died. She died young, and her death really affected him tremendously. And at the end of this new life, he says that he's going to write about a woman like no one has ever written about a woman before. And he succeeds. He succeeds with in the poem, the comedy. Well, as he's becoming a really solid poet, he is also drawn to politics. And Florence is a tremendously factionalized city. You think, we have today a polarized country. Florence was torn and ripped apart by factionalism several generations before Dante was born. When Dante was growing up, we had all these different levels: the European level, what's going on in Italy, and what's going on in Florence. But factionalism is the key word. It's almost like not unlike thug or gang warfare. Mafia. You can even think of the mafia warfare notion, where if somebody gets killed, you have a vendetta. You have to take someone's life, and it was the knockout, drawn out fighting that would go on. different alliances, and it just was very hard to govern. But Dante gets involved in this, the city government, and he strikes it big. By the year 1300, he's elected to a city council, one of these priors, and he takes off and goes down to Rome. He's asked to go down to Rome to talk to the Pope, Boniface VIII, and try to get Boniface to give the part that he's loyal to, his allegiance. Well, back dealings take place, and while he's away, Boniface actually supports the other faction, and trumped up charges are leveled against him, and he's exiled. Dante is exiled from Florence to become on the pain of death. So he's exiled from Florence and spends the next 21 years away from Florence, never to be able to come back to his beloved hometown. And in this period of time, in exile, he's waiting for the moment to come back, and he realizes this is silly. I'm going to be participating in this factionalism. I've got to refine myself in a way and grow in a way that is going to be somehow elevate myself. And maybe I can do something with others to help others realize that there's a different way. Well, the thing that takes place is he deepens himself tremendously through self-study. And about 4 years after this event, 1301, he's exiled. He starts to write. He conceives of this idea to write what came to be known the comedy. And the comedy's in three parts: Inferno, hell; Purgatorio, purgatory; and Paradiso, heaven. About a journey of a pilgrim named Dante, who goes through these realms and learns about sin, learns about forgiveness, and learns about God's love. So it's Dante, the poet, who's writing about himself. So you think of other literature. Homer talks about, Ulysses, talks about other great characters. It's Dante talking about himself. It's not unlike, actually, in a sense, if it's a spiritual biography, it's a lot like St. Augustine talking about himself in his own spiritual biography, the Confessions. Well, he writes this work as he's in exile, and he's tremendously moved by this notion of what does being exiled and separated mean, and this love that he had for Florence, not able to get back. Oh, he was married and he had a family in Florence, and eventually they had to leave because they were threatened. Their safety was threatened. But he goes around and lives in different places in Italy, never being able to get back to Florence. And so the poem in this experience, written in experience of exile about himself in the year 1300. So he's writing after the exile takes place, about an event that takes place in 1300. That's the setting, the year of the poem, on Good Friday. So when Dante's lost in this dark wood. And this notion of it really being a poem, you have to understand that it's a poem about exile. It's a poem about his own journey and what it means to him, and how he writes about that in the poem, writing about himself, this fictionalized account that he really invites us to see as real. So that's part of the neat things about the poem. We're really invited to suspend our belief and really get into the fact that Dante took this voyage. But it's absolutely important to know that you really have to understand the poem. To really understand the poem, you have to see it as a poem of exile. And what is, Lent? I mean, Lent gets us to really to go and realize through really self-contemplation all the things that we're asked to do, and renouncing pleasures, to focus more deeply, to allow God more into our lives. The sense that we're not in union with him. We're not in union with him. Or if you think of the extension of faith people, right? Our brothers and sisters in faith, because we're sinners, right? We need to get better. And our own state of exile from from the true depth of God's love. We can really get in touch with that. Our own Lenten journeys each year, each liturgical year, we have an opportunity to really see how we are tied to our own moral failures, how we can get better, how, what we can do to make amends in order to experience fully God's love. And that's what the structure of the poem is, you all. We've got Dante going down into hell and learning about all different natures of sin, and then him coming up, going through purgatory, learning about forgiveness, and then going up to heaven, learning about incredible aspects of God's love. Through a masterful presentation of poetry, of language. Dante's really he's considered the father of the what became the Italian language. He, along with two other writers, but it's unmatched. I mean, it's one of the greatest virtuoso pieces in all of world literature. For our experience in English literature, we've, Americans going back to England and English literature, Shakespeare wrote, all these incredible plays, all these incredible sonnets, works. Well, Dante does it all pretty much in one work. His greatest work. And it really is, as I said, one of the virtuoso pieces in all of world art or world literature. And we're so lucky as a faith-filled people because it speaks so profoundly to our human condition in faith. And the neat thing is, we sort of get in touch with that each Lent. So what happens is that Dante writing about himself. So this is Dante writing, in the year 13. Well, he's going to be writing from 1305, 1306. We're not really sure until he dies in 1321. That's when he dies. So he's born in 1265. He dies in 1321. The Italian Middle Ages, right when the Italian Middle Ages are becoming what we became to term the Renaissance, right at the cusp of that. Well, he's writing about himself, and set in 1300 at Good Friday, Eastertide. And he describes himself in this dark wood, this wood of error, and he can't get out of it. And he's desperate, and he all of a sudden sees somebody that he comes to find out has been sent to him. And that's his great poet mentor, Virgil, Roman poet Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid. And his first words in the entire Dante's spoken words in the entire comedy are miserere, mercy, have mercy on me. And he agrees to follow Virgil. Virgil explains to him that he's not going to be can't get out of this valley, this dark wood going up. He's got to go down. Well, he agrees to go. He has sort of second doubts right at the beginning, man, I don't know if I could do this. And Virgil says, well, let's guess what? A woman came to me. This woman was named Beatrice, Dante's muse, Dante's great love. Well, and Beatrice explained to Virgil, well, I was summoned from heaven by St. Lucy, and St. Lucy in turn had been summoned by the Blessed Mother. So you got this chain of grace that reaches Virgil, and Virgil, who is actually in limbo in hell, because he's a pagan. He was born before Jesus. He comes and he helps Dante on this journey. He's his mentor, first two parts of the poem. Well, Dante says yes, and he decides then to take the first steps towards redemption, and would turn out to be the first steps towards redemption. And he's going to be learning about the nature of sin. But in doing that, he dies to himself. There's that notion, what is it in John? that unless a single grain of wheat dies, it would only remains a single wheat. But if it dies, it bears fruit. It bears the whole grain field. But he dies to self, and he decides to go. And that's the first step. The first step is saying, hey, look, he realizes that sin had become him, some aspect of sin. He didn't do one thing big, and man, he's in trouble. It's as if he's done something over time that sort of became normalized in a wrong way of behaving morally, and he needs to get out of that. Well, I mean, lots of sinners, kind of, it's sort of, over time, we get into these habits. And what an interesting time of the year to look at habits, if not in Lent. But he goes down into Inferno, and he's learning about human brokenness. And there are moments where it really, is apparent. There's these sinners that he comes in contact with are so absolutely consumed with themselves. They're so absolutely think that they're the center of the universe. It's this egotistical selfishness that comes, and presumption that comes, that many of these sinners that he meets speak to. Well, again, so he's going down and learning about these different types of sins, and my students just absolutely love Inferno, man. That sin, all the gore, people, the way that they're being, they're suffering for eternity in hell. Usually, the Inferno is the at least that age group is the one that's the one book, the Cantica. It's called Cantica in Italian. The one book first book is of 34 chapters. Cantos, is the most attractive one to them. But anyway, he goes down. This notion, he's doing that, and the greater sense is the invitation of reading, and then also in Lent, what we are invited to do, in reflection, is what keeps us from Jesus. What is it that puts distance between us and salvation? This notion of our own exile. Now, in many ways, we self-exile by sinning, but it's sort of like it takes over and it keeps us, right? This notion of exile from Jesus. So we've got an opportunity in Lent to get in touch with that and to move beyond. Well, Dante goes all the way down into the center of hell, and it's really interesting. This notion of hell being a hot place is not Dante's conception. It's ice. It's absolute hard-heartedness, ice. Satan stuck in the middle of the earth. His own wings fan the ice field that he's stuck in. And there's all sorts of, at this point in the poem, cannibalistic references, this perversion of the Eucharist. But it really is a way that Dante gets us to look at this, what sin does in consuming us, eats us up, and how we, he has these certain sinners down at this part in hell externalizing that through cannibalism. You really get into a sense of just how unbelievably grotesque, warped, the sin can be as a perversion, really, of what God calls us to, complete unity, right, in the Eucharist. So he and Virgil go down, they get out, and they emerge on the shores of Purgatory. And in Purgatory, he's first with Virgil on the shores, and they come in contact with a guardian, an old man who's Cato, of Roman Republic fame. Cato, who committed suicide. He's a pagan, and he opposed Caesar. Those are three strikes in Dante's book. And what the heck is he doing? What the heck is this guy doing here? It is the great mystery. He shouldn't be here. As we then come to meet other sinners in this first part of purgatory, ante purgatory, they're bad guys. And how is it that they're saved? Everybody gets to purgatory. It's not like Monopoly, going back playing Monopoly, go to jail, go around, go to jail. Once you make it to purgatory, you're going to heaven. And he meets these folks that are just bad guys, people that have been excommunicated, murdered, in battle captains. What are they doing here? And the big message is that it's never too late. It's never too late to repent if we repent genuinely, so right up until the moment when we die. And this notion that love, it's the first time that we really start getting into this notion in the comedy that love triumphs. It's going to triumph if we let it shape us deeply. So Dante moves beyond this first part, and he goes up these 7 terraces, each one for one of the capital sins: pride, envy, wrath, all the way up. And what he comes to experience is that, unlike in hell, the penitents here are purging themselves of these sinful ways as a community. They're doing this together. Totally different than selfish isolation. They're doing it together. They have to do it together. And in love, this notion of everything coming back towards love is shaping this redemptive act. Love is the basis of free will. Free will is actually really deeply is tied to love. So we have this notion then of communal, very different. Well, think of us as a community going through Lent. All of us are journeying together as a community to experience eventually, the Triduum, and then we've got the miracle at Easter. This is, we're a faith community. Well, we're also a faith community. We get this sense here in the poem. We're through the communion of saints. There's this great interchange between those that are purging, asking Dante, whom they come to realize is going to be going back to Earth. Hey, got to pray for us. Remember this person and tell them to pray for me because it's going to help me along my way. This wonderful aspect of the communion of saints. They need our help in order to have the shackles removed of their own brokenness. Well, right at the top of purgatory is earthly paradise. That's where Adam and Eve were kicked out of because of their sin. And this is where we have Virgil has done all that he can for Dante. And so he disappears and he's replaced by Dante's love, Beatrice. And this procession takes place that really marks Beatrice's arrival. And she comes really as a Christ figure. And Dante realizes, and we can realize reading this, that his own story is written into this procession, which is universal. The universal procession of the ages of the church, the whole scope of God's creation. Dante has a part in it. It's incredibly moving because all of us are similar. We all have our own story within universal creation. It's a very beautiful notion, no? So, our own story is written into God's creation of the universe. Well, Beatrice then takes him, what I would consider and draw a parallel to with Easter, the Easter celebration. She takes him and they go through the various spheres of heaven, past the outer limits of heaven to the heavenly court, and where Dante eventually has this vision of God, and then he returns to earth. He gets it, he sees God in just an instant, and then it's a flash, and then he's looking up at the stars. So that's basically the outline. But for us, I think what I've touched upon, there is this resonance with Lent. Our journey, these 40 days of getting in touch with our own brokenness, and then really working on forgiveness, especially, starting with ourselves. This notion of forgiving ourselves for our brokenness and how we've hurt others, in amending and getting to. So I really think Lent has this parallel with the first two cantiche, the first two books of the first two parts of the poem, and Easter joy is really seen in Paradiso, in Dante's journey with Beatrice in Paradiso. So I hope I haven't taken too much time, Padre.
No, I think what you shared was beautiful. And I couldn't help, as you were sharing about the brokenness of sinfulness, I couldn't help but think of Flannery O'Connor
Oh yeah.
and her literature, because talk about some dark literature there. But it's beautiful in that she shows just how grace can work even in the darkest corners of humanity.
Yeah, I think of the grandmother, right? The grandmother and a good man is hard to find. Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, and of course Flannery Connor is one of our most celebrated Catholic authors, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but that sense of grace out of brokenness, it's not as macabre. I mean, O'Connor can really just be shocking in that way, But this sense of grace with deeply at the root of the comedy.
Which I think goes right back to what we were hearing about from your wonderful reflection regarding Lent. And then I think a lot of times we think of Lent as a self improvement program. Uh, and Dante reveals that you need a lot of grace. And grace is chained, meaning like there's this channeling of grace that one is able to be disposed of. I don't know if you want to maybe add to that, and there
Yeah,
are a
no,
couple.
that the moment when you can really get in touch with that, at least in the poem, it comes full force, is, God saves Dante. Dante responds. He has this opportunity to respond to an invitation from Virgil, who's been sent by Beatrice. Well, it's pretty profound because his two loves, right? His two loves as a poet, I mean, as a human being, as a man, right, are poetry and politics. Virgil is the poet of politics, seen that way in the Middle Ages because he wrote the Aeneid. And it's so cool to think, God just doesn't send him anybody. He sends him somebody who resonates with him. And that's the way it is for all of us. God tailors his invitation for improvement, for growth, for forgiveness through people who know us, whom we resonate with, and that are tied to our story. It's, and we have this opportunity then to respond to grace. It's there, right? Because of if we study it and realize, oh wow, this is interesting, this opportunity. Please, dear Father, may I not let it go by.
Beautiful. On an unrelated point, but still very much referring to Dante. Someone a live stream asked, what is your experience, Dr. Perry, of students accepting the concepts of heaven, hell, purgatory? Do you find that students struggle with these terms as in non-Catholics and approach the locations as more imaginative?
That's a good question. I've had a wide experience with students. I've never had any students step up and say, "This is a bunch of hawk." I'm going to drop the class or anything like that. I've had students. I've had students who were Muslim. I've had students who were, I guess, shaped by Confucianism, Asian. And they they'll struggle with, well, what are we talking about when you're talking about the Eucharist? What is, what is this? But they have a general concept of what the West, right, what the Christian understanding is of heaven and hell, and they find the story fascinating. They find the story fascinating because it resonates on the level of moral improvement. So they're eager to learn, or they're open to learning. Well, oh, this is an interesting concept. But for the best way that I think that they're learning about it is that it's about improvement. It's about morally becoming better. And I think whatever faith tradition they might have, that's how they're relating to it. That's one end. The other end of the spectrum, interestingly enough, for me, is that I've had students shaped by fundamentalism who, and that's not my background. So they'll say something in class. Well, that reminds me about, gospel passage or something in Acts. And it's like, oh, wow. So, I mean, I got to be really on my toes, and it's just like, well, Virgil the pagan, right? That leads Dante to helps him, leads him to salvation. Why is he, this whole debate, through no fault of his own, Virgil is in hell, right? Because simply, as Dante saw it, because he was born before Jesus, right? He was born before the time of Christ. But, I've had fundamentalist students say, nope, always, have rejected, always it's implicit that somehow along the way he had to have rejected this implicit notion of Jesus. And it's just like, well, no, that's not how Dante saw it, So I've got both ends. This is a poem. I mean, this is a poem. We're talking about a poem. We're not talking about theology. It's deeply shaped by theology, my gosh. But it's not, it's not a theological pronouncement. It's a poem, as Dante saw and was shaped by it. So the regular run-of-the-mill students that I've had, many Catholics, because they've heard of Dante either through their own education, their parents talking to them. I have a lot of students that are faith-filled, and I have an opportunity to get in touch with that when I ask them, how come you're studying? How come you want to, in the first week, how come you want to, you've chosen to take the seminar? And they, there's never been really a struggle. They understand it as they can relate to it. And for Dante, these things were very real. So I've never said, I've never gotten into the point of that saying, does your own faith tell, or do your own belief system say that this is, a metaphor or whatever? I mean, or, is it real? I just know that they accept it and they really get into
it. It's interesting to me how, as you well described, it's a poem, but a lot of people see it more than a poem. It really, I think, in many ways, is often from just a Catholic standpoint, a vehicle for evangelization, because I read it seeing a lot of Thomism in Dante's writings. When I read Dante, I often think this is a man who knew Thomas Aquinas pretty well. So I think it is fascinating that students are able to embrace what is in many seen as a Catholic traditional masterpiece of art in one sense, but are able to engage it on the theological level, which, again, I think that's what helps us grow in faith, is to engage our reason and engage, in a sense, literature, music, art, in a way that draws us back to God.
Yeah, that's a good point, Padre, because one of the points that we get to, we really come a bit in Purgatorio, but it's more in Paradiso, who, by the way, Thomas Aquinas is in heaven. He's one of the characters that Dante meets. But is this notion of the limits of reason, that it's incredibly important, the use of the mind to get to elevate us. You know, we've got the whole tradition, the classical tradition, seen in Virgil taking Dante to a certain point, where then Beatrice, representing salvation, right, takes him. There are points of discussion that the poem really brings out where reason is extraordinarily important, but there are some things that you just have to you have to accept if you choose to, right? Because there is no reasoning that's going to answer certain things. You have to give yourself over to mystery. Then, and the thing is, you know, that I tell my students, you know, that it's the poem itself is not a puzzle to be solved, right? It's a mystery. It's one mystery that leads after the next. And I get back to that when I talk about this notion of reason. There are some things that we don't know, and you know, the Trinity, the Incarnation, but the cool thing is that Dante tells us at the end of the poem that he gets it. It's sort of like he, in a flash, he's got an experience of being completely in union with divine will, and his reason and his faith are matched at this once, you know, seeing God for this flash, the face of God, and then it's over. And then he has to write about it, right? This comedy that he writes. But it's an incredible lesson, you know, that and it's tough for my fundamentalist students, you know, that really need to say, no, this is what we've got. And for, you know, for many people of faith, for Dante, as a very good medieval Catholic, you know, no, there are things that just you cannot be explained, you know. And you get a touch of that a little bit, you know, when you talk about some aspects of evil. The other aspect, you know, there's the beauty of the Trinity, incarnation, all that, but then there's evil. How can you explain that? We get to talking a little bit about, you know, the horror of Pol Pot, or the horror of the Holocaust, the horror of, you know, different things. But that's one of the, you know, that Thomistic approach, you know, is very, very important. And then you get to a point where it's just when it comes to, you know, your own decision to give way to just faith.
The juxtaposition you presented between experience and mystery is something I think Lent can help us appreciate, that we do these particular Lenten practices of fasting, praying, almsgiving, not just as another thing to add to our checklist of things to do, but rather to help us enter more deeply into this encounter with the mystery of our faith, the mystery of Christ, the mystery of God. And that experience in life is actually a sign that points us towards that mystery. And so the things we do in Lent are meant to make us more attentive to recognizing everyday experience as a sign towards mystery. Based on what you just shared, Dante really helps illuminate that beautiful truth, that everyday experience and the mystery of faith are not just two bubbles that never touch each other. They're very much intermingled, and oftentimes the everyday experience is something that actually points us, that serves as a sign to greater mysteries of faith, mainly thanks because of the incarnation. God becoming flesh brings about this great bond between God and humanity.
And that at the end, you know, this notion of, like, you know, drawing the parallel to the Easter celebration, and after this journey, encounter with self, encounter with, you know, the need to forgive, is the moment of seeing this heavenly vision, you know, is set up so beautifully, and coming to understand that everything, God's love undergirds everything, and he's going to be having this experience then that he has. But that Beatrice is actually replaced at the last cantos by Saint Bernard, and Saint Bernard directs his vision up, and he sees the Virgin Mary, And then Bernard asked the Virgin Mary, please give Dante this gift of seeing God face to face. So there's this chain, we have this chain of grace coming down, and then we have this chain of grace going back up. The actual way that Dante looks to Bernard, Bernard looks to Mary, Mary looks to her son. Her the mother and son at once. But the mystery of all that, even in the way Dante crafts this poem, this prayer that Bernard has to the Virgin Mary. But the Incarnation and the Trinity are present as mysteries that are impenetrable, right? That you really can only experience through your abandonment to love, just this deep sense of abandonment to love. And there are moments in the faith life, I believe, because I've experienced it myself, where, especially in the Eucharist, where you have a sense of that love that you're experiencing. It's so powerful that it's clear. And it is, like you say, there's like this experience of where the mind and the heart are clear and filled with God's love, and there's a peace, an incredible peace with that. But I really agree. Lent gives us that time to prepare ourselves for that, because we carry around a lot of baggage. We're human, right? What is it that Chardin said? We're humans having an angelic experience. We're not angels. No. He says it the other way. We're angels having a human experience, right? And not humans having an angelic experience, right? We ourselves are that participate in the divine, but we're human and we screw up, and we got to get over that. It's tough. I mean, I chuckle, but it's extraordinarily difficult, right? Thank God for especially during Lent, the gift of reconciliation. Then you've got this opportunity to slough off your brokenness to get better. And then I think another important point in that we have in Purgatorio is learning to say you're sorry. Saying you're sorry, and that's saying sorry to yourself, and then saying you're sorry as well to those that you've hurt. And preparing you for this moment where faith and reason they join. They can join. They can conjoin.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful to ponder and reflect upon, especially as we continue in these 40 days of perhaps what is for many of us an abnormal experience of Lent. But I pray.
This has been a year of Lent. You're right. COVID has been, that's interesting what you say that, Padre. It is. I mean, think about it. This whole COVID experience, right? I think, what an invitation. We can't go out. I mean, what an invitation to go in.
Yeah.
And then, that's it. It's just been a Lent. I can't wait till it's over, right? So we can experience this normalcy that'll be our Easter.
Yeah, but at the same time, just as we enter into Easter Sunday, we would hope that we enter into Easter having been changed by Lent. And I think a lot of times we look at Easter Sunday like, oh, thank goodness I can eat all the chocolate I want now. I am done. Like, the idea actually is we now leave the Lenten season and approach the resurrection with a transfigured body, in that we now have better ordered the goodness of creation in the manner that God wishes us to order it. That's why we give up things for Lent. Like, I give up chocolate not because I think chocolate's bad for my health or something like that, hypothetically speaking, but sure. You give something up because you recognize the goodness of that thing, but realize it's been placed out of order in your life, and you're trying to reorder it. And Easter, you should hopefully enter in feeling good about having reordered things. Maybe COVID could be our similar approach, in that I hear a lot of people say, I can't wait for things to go back to normal. Do we really want everything to go back to normal?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so I think that raises question. That's kind of beyond our scope of what
I'm here to, yeah,
you and I are here to talk. But I have one last question that someone asked.
sure.
What would be a good English translation of Dante?
That's a really good question because it's one that you're comfortable with is really important. One that you can read and it makes sense, and that you yourself have. There's some really great translations out there. Um, I use in class Mark Musa's translation. It's an economical edition, paperback with Penguin. And Musa Musa was my professor's professor. So in a sense, I'm linked generationally through to him. His translation is wonderful. John Chardy, a poet, Italian American poet, accomplished poet, has a good translation. Alan Mandelbaum, Alan Mandelbaum has one. Um, and there's one recently that I started to look at. Gosh, and I'm blanking on the name. He is, I want to say, even a secular Dominican at I want to say at Providence, and I cannot remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. But there, those are a couple. I think Mandelbaum, Chardy, Musa. But I think it's important to, when you read them. And one practice I think to getting into a translation, especially a poem, I think it's important, right? Because it is a poem, to find a translation that's a poem. Dante didn't write prose; he wrote a poem. You can't do the rhyme scheme in Italian. You can, but it's very stilted in English. So I think it's important to have the translation as a poem, and one that you can say out loud, and it somehow speaks to you. And you can get different if you go to the library and try it. And then and then decide. And that's how I would do it. I've had talks with people where is it, should I do, what if I did Hell with Musa and Mandelbaum, with Purgatory, and Chardy with Paradiso? Well, I mean, you can get different translation styles and all that, but I just go with one all the way through. But so I use Musa, but I know that Chardy's good and Mandelbaum is also good.
Is the individual from Providence College Anthony Esselin by
Thank
chance?
you, thank you. That's it. That's
Okay.
it. It's Esselin. Yeah, I'm sorry. And I thought I read that he was a secular Dominican. I might be wrong.
No, no,
Professor
no.
of
That
English, professor of English there at Providence, and I've heard good reviews about his translation. So that's another one to the person that's asking the question, Esselin.
yeah, I was only saying because that's the translation I'm actually familiar
Oh, okay.
with Dante, and I very much enjoy that translation. But now the other ones you mentioned, I'm going to have to dig into them as well.
I think it's really good. If I can, the question is really good because there are so many. You can read you could read the poem without having any notes whatsoever, and you could get something. But the notes are, even reading it in Italian, are extremely important because there's some major figures that we know from the classical world, from that particular time in the Middle Ages, where you don't need to have a lot of notes. But then there are, a lot of things are local for Dante. Dante remembers, you meet somebody, in hell, hell, purgatory, heaven, and they've got a local story. And so, who's this guy or this woman for Dante? And it's good to have the notes in order to really have an experience of what Dante's audience at the time. We're talking about 700 some years ago, right? Is that right? It's 700 years this year. This year is the anniversary. So, so it's important, I think, to get good notes, but not ones that are going to be overwhelming. I mean, some translations actually have more notes than the verses. That's why I think Musa is really good for me. And I don't know Esselin like Padre, you do.
That's great. That's, I think, very helpful for people to. As if they didn't have enough reading to do in Lent, jump right in. But, maybe that just will motivate them to, any students who are watching us here from Gettysburg College, you should definitely consider Dr. Perry's class.
Yeah. And I'll give you a couple of bucks to say good things about me. No.
Yeah, hey, they might be tempted to a double dip from both me at Catholic Campus Ministry and you
Right.
as well.
There we go.
Some of them might make a real good profit that way. But before we go, I just want to make an announcement just for our parish, a reminder that tomorrow we are doing, we're calling it a Lenten penance service, but it's not actually a penance service. It's really just a sacrament of reconciliation being available. But we're calling it our Lenten penance service because we are bringing in 4 additional priests besides Father Mitzel to assist with hearing confessions. And this will be at the Xavier Center. We'll be using the classrooms down one of the hallways to use as the confessionals. So if you're available tomorrow at 10 a.m. or just anytime before 11 a.m., you're welcome to go. I actually will not be there myself, as I will be round 2 with Dr. Perry for Notre Dame Alumni Retreat, which I'm really looking forward to. But I do invite you all to consider taking advantage of the Sacrament of Reconciliation during the season of Lent when you can. So if you're not available tomorrow between 10 and 11 a.m., check out the other times that I have made myself available for the sacrament as well. So again, thank you, Dr. Perry.
Oh, thank
you. It was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
And for all of you joining us, thank you so much. God bless you and have a good weekend. See you, God willing, tomorrow. If not, then Sunday.